My husband went missing in the mountains weeks ago. He survived, but he's different now. I couldn't explain what I saw that night, genuinely shocked by what I was witnessing. When Alex initially walked in the front door, I was relieved. Almost 3 weeks had passed since he and a small camera crew disappeared in the mountains. Out here it's all rocky terrain with pockets of caverns stretching thousands of miles, completely isolated and not explored very well. They were airdropped almost a month ago. The plan was to meet a week later at the drop location, but Alex and the crew never showed up. Authorities sent in search teams but soon stopped. Because of the ongoing storms, the operation was deemed too dangerous. So we prepared for the worst, while still holding on to hope. No one thought they would survive. No one ever does. But he did. "Isabel?" he called out, closing the front door behind him. My body hesitated, feet rooted to the ground, wondering if it was all just a wonderful dream, waiting to fade away at the last moment. But I gave in, running to the door to see him standing there. My heart raced as I wrapped my arms around him tightly. I never thought I'd get to see him again. My mind had already processed all the possibilities of outcome. The likelihood of Alex returning was poor, yet there he stood. Not a scratch on him. He was just as put together as the day he left, albeit a bit thinner. But the moment he stepped forward and walked into the light, I knew something was off. My body tightened. I could feel a sickness growing in the pit of my stomach. You become familiar with your partner's habits when you live with them. Their mannerisms, eccentricities. In time, you can read them quite well. They're part of your life. The body can recognize when something isn't right. A gut feeling setting off alarm bells. What did it for me were the eyes. That old saying, eyes are the windows into the soul. That had never been more accurate. Alex's eyes showed me emptiness. Darkness. It felt like somebody else was wearing my husband's face. The look he gave me, along with that fake smile. I can't stress enough the anxiety that filled me when we locked eyes. I tried to suppress the intrusive thoughts, but it was difficult, mixing in my mind like oil and water. But I had to celebrate. Alex was back, and the family was together again. The kids came running down the stairs when I called out to them, and soon we were all huddled together, holding Alex as if it were the last time. A surreal moment we never thought we'd get to experience. I stepped back and took a deep breath. My eyes met Alex's blank stare and eerie smile again, triggering the terrible feeling. The discomfort must have been visible on my face, but he didn't seem to react. He just lowered his head and returned his attention to the kids with eyes still fixed on me. That sent a shiver down my spine. From the moment he walked in, it was clear that he didn't prefer to speak. He avoided most conversations and mainly used gestures to communicate. But with enough coaxing, Alex briefly explained what happened. "We got caught in a storm for a few days," he said, seemingly out of breath. "Found an abandoned outpost. Not many people. Not much to eat.
Eat. Eat. Eat."
When he spoke, he kept repeating the word eat, as if in a loop. His mouth froze in a grimace before he stopped and turned his attention toward me. Damn it, those horrible eyes. He was giving me the creeps. Then, I started noticing further strange behavior. Something was definitely wrong. For one, we never saw him eat. He would just say, "I'm not that hungry," and then continue working in the basement. This went on for a while, until one night, I caught him. It was just after 2 a.m. when I woke up and noticed he wasn't in bed. I crept downstairs to find the refrigerator door wide open. And there he was, standing in front of the open fridge, holding a plate of raw deer meat, just staring at it, inches away from his face. I remember taking a step and the floor creaking. He turned his head quickly to acknowledge me, staring me down before putting the steak back and slamming the fridge door. Alex rushed past me with a brief glare before going downstairs. That moment set us on the road of many red flags. Then, our livestock began disappearing mysteriously right around the time he came back. There were no traces of an attack, but it was as if something just plucked one out and left without a trace. It was the strangest thing. But then the animals no longer seemed to like Alex either. He used to be their favorite. They would run up to him all the time for attention. Now they were spooked by his presence. The animals took notice of his change and they kept their distance. During the day, he would mostly be working in the basement, which is where he has his workshop. He didn't allow anyone to go down there, and so we stayed out, but I managed to take a look once or twice. It looked like a den where an animal was living. But once the sun dipped past the horizon, he came to life. His movements were visibly different, more relaxed and natural. Most times I didn't hear him, thinking I was in the room alone, only to turn around and see him standing there, smiling. I felt like prey in a game I didn't even know we were playing. I believe the trauma from his ordeal had left him with lasting side effects, so I was careful not to prod too much for fear of causing more harm. But I was frightened. I suggested for him to see a therapist to help him deal with his experience. But he just let the words pass right through. He didn't even acknowledge me. So I left it at that, until I saw him for what he truly is. The following evening I was clearing the table when I happened to break a cup in the kitchen, a small mistake that sent glass flying everywhere. Alex made no movement at all. He was very much uninterested. Then, I began cleaning the mess when I accidentally cut my finger, a welt of blood quickly forming. I remember looking down and focusing to pull the shard out. When I looked back up, there was Alex, staring down at me with a predatory look. He was salivating, eyes dark and glazed over. I almost screamed. He asked me, "Are you okay?" in such a weird tone that it made my skin crawl. His hand gripped mine tightly as he brought my finger closer to his nose, sniffing the air around the cut. I quickly pulled away and he seemed to snap out of his trance, now staring at the drops of blood smeared on his hands as he made his way back to the couch. God, it was disturbing, but I couldn't let the kids know. Even they thought Alex was acting strange. If they only knew the things I've seen. I had already thought about leaving with the kids, but he seemed to be very observant of what we did. I didn't want to trigger him. So I did the next best thing and called Sheriff Crow. In our conversation, I mentioned an animal had been attacking our livestock and some had gone missing. I asked for him to come up and investigate, and that afternoon, he did. When Sheriff Crow arrived, it was still light out. The evening sun reflected off his silver sunglasses as he made his way up to the house. Everyone in the town knew him. Nice guy. I grew up with him. Always polite as a kid, very by-the-book kind of attitude. He grew into a dependable man with old-fashioned morals, well-liked by everyone. We both exchanged pleasantries for a few moments before walking the perimeter of the property where I pointed out the issues. Alex stood at the window in the living room, watching us the entire time. Eventually the sheriff threw up his hand and waved, then my husband slowly waved back. He must have felt something was off, knowing that Alex was lost up in those mountains and the only one to survive. Then he started asking me odd questions. Things like, "Has your husband been walking around at night? Has he been acting different? Have his appetites changed?" It was a lot of information to take in, but it seemed that on some level, he understood what I was going through. What did he know about my situation? I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. Yet he knew what I wanted to say. He knew. Because right then and there, He told me to grab the kids and leave. So we did just that. I trusted him. Sheriff Crow walked me back to the house and we quietly stepped inside, making our way into the living room. I noticed the sheriff quickly unlock the clasp on his holster, hand hovering over the revolver. That frightened me. Something was going to happen. We looked over at the window where Alex had been standing earlier, but he wasn't there. I quietly called out to the kids. Laura was in her room reading while Dennis was fixated playing computer games. They were annoyed that I forced them to stop and pack, but they could tell from the look on my face that I was being serious. The sky was setting when we finished getting our things ready, and Crow stood vigilant in the doorway. When the coast was clear, we all hurried down the stairs. The kids kept asking what was going on, but I couldn't reply. I just kept repeating, "Hurry up." The need to get out of there was overwhelming. We made it to the front of the house when Alex appeared in the doorway. He seemed taller, more distorted. The atmosphere was dark and oppressive. Then he spoke.
Where are you going?
His voice reverberated with an unnaturally deep resonance that seemed impossible. It was enough to make Sheriff Crow pull out his revolver and aim it directly at him. The sheriff kept shouting, "Get behind me," as Alex laughed loudly. We ran toward the back entrance, turning the kids' attention away from the horror. I handed them the car keys, and that's when my husband rushed forward with terrible speed. Crow let off 2 shots. One clipped Alex's ribs, and the other found its way directly into his chest. But he didn't flinch. It didn't even faze him. Crow removed a second revolver from his holster, kissed the barrel and fired a shot into Alex's chest again. Alex stopped in his tracks and howled in pain. Whatever he had in those bullets did the trick. The sheriff pointed the weapon at the creature's chest again, but before he could finish him off, Alex quickly lunged forward and grabbed Crow by the hand. Shots fired into the air. With the gun still in his grip, he began to crush it slowly. A blood-curdling scream escaped Crow's throat, then he was tossed away. The gun sat on the floor in pieces, while the bones in his hand protruded through the skin. My heart sank. Now I knew what the sheriff had feared. That was no longer my husband. I tried helping Crow up, but he just kept screaming for me to go. "Just go," he shouted, over and over again. I fought back, but he pushed me away and ran straight into Alex. I looked back long enough to see Crow turn on the gas burners in the kitchen before Alex picked him up off the floor. The flowing blood from his ruined hand dripped freely into the open mouth of the creature. It let out a series of horrifying wails and moans before clamping down on the sheriff's hand and tearing it clean off. The man was in shock, pale white and gasping for air. I screamed and Alex turned to me. His eyes were completely black and his pale skin showed a network of dark veins beneath the surface. The creature roared, hunched over its prey and eating its spoils. Then Crow raised his only hand and told it to go to hell before pulling the trigger. I ducked out just before the air ignited into a fireball that took over the house. Crow and Alex were both screaming. I cried while running to the car, fearing for my life. But I feared for Alex's as well. What had he become? The snow crunched loudly in my ears and I could see the kids waiting in the car up ahead. The creature's ungodly screams continued behind me while I fumbled with the door, constantly looking over my shoulder. The kids panicked, holding each other and crying in the back seat. Finally, I found myself inside, then cranked the engine and sped off. While driving away from the house, I looked in the rearview mirror. On the roof, painted in the glow of the growing flames, was Alex, standing tall and watching us leave the property. His proportions were all wrong, and I could feel his stare burning a hole in my head. I didn't know where to go, so we just kept driving. It was all we could do. We drove until we ran out of gas. There was no way that thing could keep up. Eventually, we arrived at the motel we're staying in now. The adrenaline wore off and shock set in aggressively. I was a complete mess while distracting the kids with TV and food. But they're scared and miss their dad. They just keep asking about him. Luckily for them, they didn't see everything that happened. I can never tell them what I saw. They wouldn't understand. I called the sheriff's department and told them everything that happened. That my husband attacked Crow, minus a few small details. When they arrived on scene, the fire had already been put out. They did find his cruiser, but not his body. Or Alex, for that matter. They don't know where he is, but they said he couldn't last out there in the elements for very long. But they don't know Alex. We've been here 3 days now. A couple of older officers came here to take my statement and gather info. They quietly told me that this kind of thing has happened before. Now I'm curious to know what they're not telling me. I haven't seen Alex since, but I have been hearing a strange tapping coming from outside of the motel during the night. My son told me that he hears someone calling his name. He says it was his dad. I'm afraid. Is there anything I can do? I can't stay here another night. We're leaving while it's still light out. I know there are legends about this sort of thing, but how much of it is real? It's not going to leave us alone. Please, if you have any information that could help, I would be eternally grateful. Thank you. Isabel.